To build an audience, you help people. To build a community, you have to help people help each other. So it's not about you creating all the value for the customers that you're trying to gather, or the users of your app, or whoever it is. It's not you creating it. You're creating spaces and platforms, and you're facilitating these experiences for people to be able to help each other.
We're super excited to have David with us today. David Spinks is the founder of CMX, which was an organization dedicated to community professionals, and he's now also the author of a book, sorry, what was it called, David? The Business of Belonging?
Belonging, yeah.
Brilliant, yeah, exactly, which is amazing in terms of the reviews that I've read and just all the hype around it. It's just a huge voice around the community of community builders, and we see a lot of companies coming through OnDeck that sort of are taking that angle, and OnDeck itself is a company that is taking that angle. So will be an educational talk for me as well. Yeah, super excited for David to talk to us today about sort of community, how it plays with business goals, and just that whole complex of things, which I think is super fascinating. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to David to get us started.
Cool. So thanks so much for being here. Very excited to be here. Have long been a big fan of OnDeck and the community that you've all built. Eric Tornberg and I go a ways back, and it's been really cool to see this community grow, and just honored to be asked to be able to contribute. We'll love to hear where everyone's coming from as well. So maybe if you want to use the Zoom chat so I can see it, just share where you are tuning in from. It'll be cool. I'm sure we have people from all over the world here. Yeah. Okay. New Zealand, Charleston, Ohio, Sweden, Seattle, SF. I'm in SF as well. Dominican Republic, SF still. Yep. I'm still here too. A lot of SF. Cool. Brazil. Awesome. So we have a pretty global group here. Very cool. So I'll just kind of kick off with a quick introduction, and I'll share my screen here and make sure you can all see my slides. Can you all see my slides? Just give me a thumbs up. Perfect. So I'm David Spinks. I'm the founder of CMX. CMX is a community for community teams, community professionals. We started 7 years ago. I've been building community for startups and companies for about 11 years now. Started CMX because I had nowhere to ask my questions. There wasn't a community for community professionals. So I built one, started with CMX Summit, our conference, and has grown to tens of thousands of community professionals that are gathering on Facebook and Slack, and events in over 60 chapters around the world. We publish research. We just do everything we can to help people and businesses build better communities. CMX was acquired by a company called Bevy 2 years ago. Bevy's enterprise SaaS platform for powering your community events. So if you are hosting any virtual conferences this year, or virtual events, or if you have local chapters that are powered by your community members, the Bevy's a platform that's custom built specifically for community-driven events like that. And so we are both working together to just grow the community industry and help businesses build better communities. What I'm going to be talking about today is something we call the Community MBA. So the Community MBA is actually a longer course that we offer in CMX Academy, our training platform, that usually would take about 4 to 6 weeks to complete. So this is going to be a hyper abbreviated kind of introduction version of that, just to give you a couple frameworks and high level concepts that you can use to better understand how to align community with your business goals, and make sure that you're building community that's not just community for the sake of community, but you're actually understanding how it's growing your business so that you can justify continuing to invest in it and make it a legit part of your business, not just a nice to have. Would love, as questions come up, you can type them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. But we'll have plenty of time at the end of this to have a discussion. That's usually where the best stuff happens, is in the Q&A at the end. And I want to be able to hear specifically what are, the challenges that you're all thinking about at your stage in your startup building journeys. I love working with early stage startups. It's where I've spent most of my career, is working in early stage startups or starting my own companies. I've started 3 companies. I've participated in 2 accelerator programs. This is the world that I love to play in. So very excited to dive into your specific challenges. All right. So with that, let's kick off. Just to kind of set the context of what we're talking about when we're building community and what the space looks like, this was a stat that came out from First Round in their 2019 State of Startups report somewhat recently, where they found that 80% of the startups they surveyed are investing in community today, and 28% consider it to be their moat and critical to success. So, I mean, when I saw this stat, I was jumping for joy, because when I started working in this space, it was like, pulling teeth to get anyone to care about, investing in community as a business and really understand it and take it seriously. And I think in the last year or so, we've seen like a huge investment in community from businesses. And suddenly it's like the hot thing that every VC is talking about. And every startup's trying to figure out how to build community into their growth strategy. Big brands are trying to figure out how to build their customer communities out to drive growth and customer success. So we're really hitting this like very exciting point in the world of community building in the context of business. But what does it mean for a business to build community? Community is a term that can mean 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people. Everyone has a different experience with community. Everyone has a different understanding of what community means in their context. And when you look at it in the context of a business, it can mean a lot of different things to a business. So let's start off by just kind of getting a high-level definition. I like to think of it as comparing an audience to a community. So to build an audience, what do? You help people, right? You build a product that helps people. You create content that helps people. You give a talk that helps people. You have a YouTube channel or TikTok channel or something, and you build up an audience, right? It's usually an individual person or a brand that's creating value, and so people start following them, or a creator, and people start following them, and an audience forms. The difference there is that it's one to many, right? It's one person or one brand or one creator, and then there's a many kind of audience following them. Community is different in that it's all about people helping each other, right? So to build an audience, you help people. To build a community, you have to help people help each other. So it's not about you creating all the value for the customers that you're trying to gather, or the users of your app, or whoever it is. It's not you creating it. You're creating spaces and platforms, and you're facilitating these experiences for people to be able to help each other. And the beauty of that is you can actually exponentially scale any part of your business, because now you're not limited and bottlenecked by your own bandwidth and what you're capable of doing, because you're tapping into the collective resources of a group of people. So to put it in the context of specific areas of business, you could think about traditional customer success is teaching your customers, right? It's creating training programs and creating education to teach your customers how to use your product and improve in their career. Community-powered customer success is helping customers teach each other. So empowering your users, empowering your customers to create training for each other, education for each other, so they're making each other more successful. And now you can exponentially scale up how much content you're creating for them. Traditional marketing or field marketing is you're hosting events for your customers, right? We as a brand are going to host a meetup or an event and try to engage people. Community-powered field marketing would be empowering your community members to self-organize events for each other, right? So now you're not having to organize all the events, and so you're going to be very limited by your own event organizing resources. You can now tap into tens or hundreds or thousands of people to self-organize events under your brand representing you. Business in general is just creating value through your product, through a service. You're trying to create a unique value proposition for people. Community-powered business is where you think about everything you're doing in business in terms of how do you empower people to create value for each other, right? So it's I believe, a fundamentally different way of thinking about business. It's not just a department in an organization. It's not just a part of marketing. It's a completely different philosophy in how businesses function, because it's not us just distributing a product. It's us creating a space for people to create value for each other. Another way to think about community is it's an extension of your team and accelerator of impact. So any part of your business, whether it's engineering, products, supports, customer success, growth, any part of your business, you can extend the capabilities and resources of your team by empowering a community to contribute to it and organize around it, right? So a couple good examples. Duolingo. So Duolingo is the largest language learning app in the world. They have 300 million active users, more than that today, and they've had over 80 courses. I think they might be actually at over 100 courses now that have pretty much all or almost all of them, except for the first few they created, were created by and with the community. So they created a system where the community could contribute. If you're fluent in German and Spanish, then you can contribute to that course. And they're able to scale up their content in this exponential way. They also applied it to their community engagement around their products. So what they found was people would take a class, say, I learned a class in Hebrew and I finished the class, but now I want to practice it with other people and actually use it. Duolingo didn't really have a way to do that. So what they did is they started empowering their community members to self-organize local events and meetups. They have a team of 3 people working on this program, 3 people on that community team, and they are running over 2,500 events per month with a team of 3 people all over the world. So it's just an example of the kind of scale that a startup or a company can reach by empowering their community to self-organize and create value for each other. Another great example, Salesforce. So Salesforce isn't a community-centric product. It's a SaaS product. It's a CRM software, but they bring community into every element of the business today. So 84% of the questions that come up on their forum are answered by other customers. So they're able to reduce their support costs and the amount of people they have to have on staff to support customers by millions and millions of dollars as a result. They have over 1,000 local Trailblazer chapters. Again, this is a volunteer-led event program by their most passionate and active community members. They have over 170,000 attendees at Dreamforce, and Dreamforce itself being a massive conference where they empower the community to self-organize events, self-organize experiences within the umbrella of Dreamforce. So just a few of the ways that they bring community into their business. So that's kind of like the high level of what a community, kind of like what it means for a business to build community. And so now I want to move into a little bit more of a practical, what does an actual community strategy look like? So you're bought in, you're like, cool, I want to build this community. I like this idea for my company, my startup. How do I actually start executing on this? So there are 3 levels of community strategy that we work with. And so when we work with companies, when we create a strategy, we always kind of think about it in terms of these 3 levels. So the first level is the business level. So what are the outcomes you aim to achieve? We're going to talk about the 6 specific outcomes that you can drive a community in just a minute, but just high level, like what is our business objective? What are the things we're trying to do? Are we trying to grow right now? Are we trying to improve our product? What do we want to do as a business, and how can community over the long run fit into that, right? And keeping in mind that community is a long run investment. It's not something that you can A/B test. It's not growth hacking. It's not product marketing. It's people centric. It's relationship centric, and that takes time to build trust and build an ecosystem of trust, which is essentially what a community is. So it's not something where I would say like do this and you're going to start seeing growth next month. It's more of start doing it now, because there's going to be compounding impact over the entire future of your company, but you need to start now, and maybe in 6 to 12 months is where you'll really start to see big returns as you're growing your business with your community, right? And so that gets into the community level. So what are the actual community programs that you're going to launch and measure and track that will build a healthy and engaged community, and that will help you achieve your business goals? All right, so business level is what are the objectives we're trying to achieve as a business. Community level is how are we building a community, serving our members, creating experiences that they really value and love. And then the tactical level is like what you're actually going to be doing day to day, week to week, in order to result in a healthy and engaged community and have that business impact that you want to have. All right, so we're going to talk about that first level, the business level, today, and there's lots and lots of content and lots of things we offer around how to build an engaged community and community tactics. You can go to cmxhub.com anytime. We have hundreds of free talks and articles and research and all that stuff, so dig in there more. Today we're going to focus on that business level. So how do you measure the quantifiable impact of community? To do that, we use the Spaces model. This is Space Cat. Everyone say hello to Space Cat. He's our official mascot of business value. He's very, very business savvy, Space Cat is. And so he walks us through the 6 specific business outcomes that community can drive for an organization. So support, product acquisition, contribution, engagement, and success. Pretty much every single community program is going to fall into at least one of these buckets. More often than not, you're going to be thinking about 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes 5 or 6, although I wouldn't recommend it doing too many things when you're first starting off. But let's dive into each one just to give you a little more color. So support. On the support side, so this is like that, Trailblazer support forum or Apple support forums. You're probably familiar with what a support forum is. It's the most traditional form of these kind of community programs. And so this is where you're working to improve customer satisfaction and save customer service costs by organizing members to be able to answer questions and solve problems for each other. So it's often the first line of support. So instead of someone calling in or emailing you, they can go to the forum and see if someone else has answered the question already, or they can ask the question in your community. The goal over time is to improve your FAQs and knowledge bases, so you can pull insights from the community, answers there, put them into a more of a formal knowledge base. So again, you're kind of deflecting any support costs and calls that might come in, and you're tapping into the experts in your community to answer questions for you. Great examples of this: Atlassian, they have over 3 million members in their community, very focused on improving customer satisfaction. They measure their CSAT score and measure how they improve customer satisfaction through this community. And they also measure how it increases the likelihood that someone chooses to buy the product. So they can track if someone comes that isn't a customer yet, or is a customer that's considering buying a new product within their ecosystem. How does participating in the community impact their likelihood of buying the product? Fitbit on the hardware side, on the consumer side. So they have a great support forum that actually drives an annual cost savings of $40 million for Fitbit. They also organize a community council who answers 40% of their questions. So something to keep in mind when building these kinds of communities is it's not going to be 1,000 members and all answering questions for 1,000 members. It's probably going to be something like 100 members who answer 80% of the questions for the other, 1,000 or 10,000 members who are on there. So you're going to have a core group that is most active and answers most of the questions, and you can formalize it in something like a community council to make sure that those folks are successful. All right, next up we have products. So products, you could think about it as like collecting feedback or driving innovation. So you're all building product, whether it's software or service or hardware or physical good, and you want to make your product as great as possible. Well, one of the best ways that you can make your product, maybe the only way to make your product really great, is to ask people, to get feedback from people that you're trying to build it for, and to you have the opportunity to bring the community into that innovation process. So you can build a community that gives you an opportunity to like listen to customer questions and ideas that they have in your community. Some community platforms will help you actually prioritize features, so you can see what are the features that people are asking for most. Maybe they're voting it up or commenting on it a lot. You can bring the voice of the customer into your product development process through focus groups and just bringing them into the decision-making process. The community is also a great place to distribute surveys and collect feedback that you can apply to your products. So community teams are working with product teams by gathering feedback and insights that they can bring to the product team. So like at CMX, we're constantly putting together research and reports and insights that we can share with the product team about what community teams are looking for when they're considering, purchasing a virtual event software, community event software. You can invite the product team to interact directly with the community. So bring your product team into the spaces that you're hosting, into an event, facilitate those discussions. I actually just spoke with my friend Evan Hamilton, who leads community at Reddit, and they do a adopt a moderator program. So members of the product team at Reddit can actually join a moderation team for 2 weeks at Reddit. And so they get to like firsthand experience what it's like to manage a community. A really cool program. And again, just get your community involved in decisions and communications around product. So Back to Fitbit is another community that they run. So separate from their support community, they have the Idea Exchange. They have over 100,000 features that have been submitted through this community, many of which has been applied to their product. So this is kind of this scalable way of collecting feedback from lots and lots of people, seeing what they're voting on, seeing what they're commenting on, and bringing that into your product. You can do an advisory council. So Lyft is a great example of this. At first, they just had 10 people in their advisory council. Now they have over 200 that represent different regions that they're focusing on all over the US, diversity of different kinds of people from different backgrounds. And they bring that council into testing new features, giving them feedback on the direction of their product roadmap, just like having representatives of the community involved, which also helps get the rest of your customers, the rest of your community excited, because now they feel like they have people representing their voice and their needs in the room with your team as you're making these big decisions. All right, third up, we have acquisition. So everyone's favorite business value, right? Growing, getting new customers, driving new pipeline. And so this is where you're building community specifically to grow your pipeline, grow your audience, grow your traffic, things like that. You can use community to grow the market. So there's a lot of communities or companies that build communities that they build it specifically to create a category, right? They want to grow a new category, and so they want to brand their community around that category, knowing that they want to expand into it, right? Like Gainsight with their customer success community, or HubSpot with their inbound marketing community, just called Inbound, or Branch has their mobile growth community. So lots of good examples where they're trying to grow the category, grow the market, increase awareness of your brand, drive leads and pipeline. So people who join your community or who attend an event can be connected back to something like Salesforce and be tracked back to, great, how do we know that prospect is engaged with us? Did they participate in our events? Did they participate in our community? You can build trust with prospects. So invite prospects to your community, and if they've already participated in the community, then there's a lot of established trust, and help sales overcome objections by bringing the community into it. So if someone has an objection, now you have lots of insights from the community you can use to overcome it. So yeah, the one example is Branch that I mentioned. So they have a community called Mobile Growth. So you can see it's powered by Branch, but they decided to brand it as something different than their core brand. They host multiple event types all throughout the year, big events, small meetups, small discussion groups. They found that it actually influences $5 million in their annual recurring revenue. So already seeing massive impact in how it's impacting their pipeline. And they've seen a 10x in revenue influenced versus spend. So about a 10x ROI on this community acquisition program. Another great example is a Skim on a more consumer side. So the Skim is the largest newsletter in the world. They have over 7 million subscribers. And 18% of their entire list has come directly from their Skim Ambassador program, where they create an official ambassador group that gets perks and benefits in return for, bringing new subscribers into the Skim. And their very first hire, actually, they had 2 founders, and their very first hire was a community manager. So again, great example of, like, you may not see value right away, but start now to build community. It's kind of like starting to invest in a investment in like a Roth IRA or retirement fund or college fund. Like, everyone will tell you, start investing now. It's not going to, you're not going to get rich on it today, but it's going to compound over time, and community works in the same way. So invest now and you'll see that compounding return over time. Lululemon's another great example on the consumer and the physical goods side. So since the very beginning, they've had their Lululemon ambassador program. They have physical stores, and the people who own and run those stores in the franchise model, they are all given, the freedom to organize events, to organize experiences, and to find local ambassadors. So they have fitness coaches, they have yoga teachers, they have running coaches, weightlifters, just anyone who's focused on fitness who now can become an official Lululemon ambassador. Again, they get a bunch of perks and free product and swag and access to events and experiences in return for their ambassadorship. And that's been there since day one for Lululemon, and continues to be a core part of their brand and their growth strategy today. Fourth up, we have contribution. So contribution is an interesting one in that, if you're building a company that's a platform in any way, you're almost certainly going to have a contribution focused community program. So, think about anything that's collaborative consumption, like Airbnbs and Lyft, anything that's open source, where you have a lot of contributors building tools together, crypto, all very contributor driven. Any sort of social network where people are creating the content that makes your platform, makes your product. You could think of like Clubhouse today, right? Like you're going to have this contribution focused community focused on your creators, your sellers, your contributors, the people who are creating the content that makes up your platform. It could be content, code, actions, resources, whatever it is. Great examples, Airbnb. So obviously Airbnb, a great example of a community driven business where they're not creating the value. They're not opening up hotels. They're creating a platform for people to create value for each other, to offer each other homes and apartments and places to stay. They have 890,000 super hosts, right? So just their most active, their power users, they have almost 1 million of them. So massive, massive community program, all focused on how do they make their hosts really engaged, successful, feel supported, feel like they're a part of something. Because if the hosts are successful on Airbnb, then Airbnb is successful. For anything that's developer relations focused, so if you have anything where developers are contributing to an ecosystem or a platform, whether it's open source or not, Google Developer Groups is one of the premier examples of this. They have over 1,000 chapters around the world. They do Google Dev Fest, which we actually were lucky to power that with Bevy this year. They had over 30,000 people participate in this virtual event across 200 live simultaneously hosted virtual events, all powered by the community. So really epic scale, again, just completely community driven. And it's all built to engage developers who are building on the Google and Android platforms, provide them with educational resources, support, make them feel like they're a part of a real community. So if your customers are developers or you have a platform that you want developers to contribute to, 100% you're going to have a contributor focused community program. Twitch, great example, again, on the consumer side here. So it's all about streamers, right? If their streamers are successful, then they're successful. They do something called Creator Camp, which is all about teaching creators, streamers on the platform how to be more successful at streaming and growing their audience and engaging their audience and connecting streamers to each other so they all feel like they're a part of something too, just like summer camp. And that goal ultimately is to increase the broadcast hours and grow new categories that they're trying to reach that are outside of gaming, right? So, very focused on gaming, obviously at Twitch. They want to start moving into cooking and arts and crafts and all these other areas. They're taking a very community-driven approach to expanding. Or another developer example here, the Slack platform community. They're doing it all through in-person and online communities, all about supporting the developers that are building Slack plugins and apps on the platform. And that's a very fast-growing program. All right, next up we have engagement. So engagement is essentially customer retention. It's a very common program for companies because it's kind of how we think about community, right? It's like if people enjoy being a part of our community, then hopefully they'll stick around longer as a user, as a customer, as an employee, right? Like all of these programs can apply internally to your employees as well. And so you're really looking to improve your customer experience, net promoter score, by just hosting really great community experiences for people. So the hope is belonging leads to loyalty. So you can see like average contract value or average lifetime of a customer, things like that, that will tell you, are you actually driving retention through community? Are you improving customer experience and satisfaction? And you're trying to improve trust in your team and your brand. So Duolingo, great example, again, all about increasing user retention in the app. So if people come to these events, is that increasing, how long they're sticking around in the app and continuing to use a program rather than just disappearing after they finish a course. Atlassian, so they have their support specific community, but then they've also created these communities of interest around things like teamwork or project management, collaboration, things that are related to their product, but not about their product. Life sciences, compliance. So again, it's a way to just engage your community and their customers outside of just things around their product. They want them to come to Atlassian for all the things that they might have to learn in their career. On the consumer side, Sephora is a really great example of this with their beauty insider community. They offer online space for anyone to discuss beauty, whether or not it has to do with their product. And they actually found that the members who participate in this community are 2 times more likely than their average customer to, or no, they spend 2 times more than their average customer, and their power users on this community spend 10 times more than their average customer. So, just really good signal that building this community and engaging people through community is impacting how much people are spending with the business ultimately. And finally, we have success. So success is taking a more proactive approach to making your customers learn and be better at using your product and growing in their career. So you're helping customers skill up how they use your product and develop their strategies. You're empowering customers to become mentors and instructors for each other. And the ideal is you're driving customer expansion and adoption. So the Trailblazer community from Salesforce, really good example of this. If you buy Salesforce, the software, you're not just getting the software, you're getting access to this incredible community that's filled with training programs and educational resources and just millions of members who are ready to help engage with you and support you. They found that 82% of their customers, when they surveyed them, said that the program increased the ROI of their investment in Salesforce. So it truly made their customers feel like they're getting more value out of being a customer because they had access to this community in addition to the software. And again, that's powered by this online program and the 1,000 chapters they have around the world. Notion's another really good example of this with the Notion Pros community. So they gather users online and offline to share products and tips. If you use Notion, you know it's kind of like a blank template kind of thing that you can make your own. So they empower their users to share templates and what they've created with the product to be able to learn from each other and just kind of build on what what they've already figured out and built for themselves. And they do these show and tell focus events for power users where you can show off your Notion setup. Excuse me. All right, so those are the 6 areas of the Spaces model, the 6 business goals of community. Space Cat gets his sunglasses because he's going to say goodbye now. Thank you, Space Cat, for walking us through the business goals of community. And so I'm not going to go through these in detail, but if you want to just take a screenshot of this, you're welcome to. So you can actually get real practical and think about each of these as a potential objective. We use OKRs as a team at CMX and Bevy. Whatever you use, whether it's OKRs or 40X or V2 Moms or whatever your goal setting structure is, basically you have your big goal and then the measures that will tell you if you've achieved that goal. And so these are just some ideas. This is not exhaustive, but just some ideas that you can use to say, okay, here's the objective we're trying to drive as a community team for our business. And here's some key results that we might be able to track that will tell us if we're having an impact on the business. Keep in mind, these are business outcomes, not necessarily community outcomes. You need to balance this with an extreme focus, especially in the early days of just like building real authentic community. You need to focus on like who are your members and what are their problems and what are their needs, and make them the priority first, business value second, because if they feel like you're just doing this to grow your business, that's not really how people want to participate in communities. They're not going to feel drawn to it. But if you really invest in an authentic community, you should start to see these kinds of results show up as you continue to grow that community. Again, 6 to 12 months is probably a reasonable timeline for really starting to see great results start to compound from your community. Last thing I'll say is just to get focused. Like I said, whenever I teach this workshop, I ask people to raise their hand and share like how many of these they're focused on, and everyone smiles because they know that it's wrong, but they're focusing on like 5 or 6 of these things all at once. Look, if you have 5 or 6 community professionals on your team and you're like, well, you have a mature community program and you're well resourced and you got all the shit figured out, then like, great, do all of it. But if you're just kicking off your program, which I imagine a lot of you are, it's important to get really focused and maybe choose, 1 or 2 of these things. Keep in mind, community is an extension of your team. So each one of these 6 areas is tied to a team, right? It's like marketing or customer success or product. And so if you're doing all 6, then you're spread across 6 teams, 6 objectives, 30 plus key results. It's a lot to try to track for one person or one team that's running community for you. So I would focus on what's most important for your business today, whether it's growth or learning or improving your product or engagement and retention, choose 1, 2, maybe I'll allow you to do 3 in extreme situations, and just get really focused so you can make sure that you're accountable to a few things with your community. Those other values will show up organically no matter what, right? If you build in a community for engagement, people are going to be referencing new customers and driving growth, and they're going to be giving you product feedback. So it's going to happen organically, whether or not you focus on it, but focus on it so that you can choose the right tools and spaces and metrics, and just be focused as a team on what you're prioritizing when you're thinking about, the work you're going to do day to day. And the last thing is just to give you some data. We're actually going to be publishing in the first week of February, brand new data from this past year for the 2021 reports. So keep an eye out for that. Lots of great data about how businesses are investing in community. This is from last year's report. So you can see kind of a lot of companies investing in that retention and engagement, a lot in the content and contribution. I think acquisition is going to keep growing, but it's still a little bit lower. Feedback, ideation a little bit less, and support is continuing, especially online, to be a big focus. All right. And when you're thinking about which ones to focus on, just choose one that's a priority to your business and your teammates. Choose one that your members will be motivated to contribute to, right? If you launch a support forum, but none of your customers want to actually support each other in a support forum, you're not going to have a lot of success. So lean into what your members actually want and focus on outcomes that you can measure, because if you can't measure it, then you won't know if you're successful. All right, that was a lot of information. I'm sorry I went fast, but I wanted to leave at least 20 minutes here for Q&A. You can go to cmxhub.com for again, we have hundreds of talks from CMX Summit and articles and resources, research. You can join our community. We have a Slack group, a Facebook group, pro community, and we're constantly just hosting events and doing lots of stuff to help you learn how to build your communities. So hope you'll join us in our community.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David. There have been a bunch of questions that are coming up, and a lot of them are fantastic. So I want to make sure that fellows have the chance to ask. I also saw probably 8 or 10 on deck teammates join this call over the course of it. I just put a little thing in our random channel, and people just flocked here to hear you talk about community, because obviously we're building community-oriented business as well across all the different fellowships and groups that we're pulling together. But so all it's exciting. Love sort of the framework I'm thinking about this. Want to make sure that fellows are able to ask their questions. The first one is from Tiani about sort of how to start and the very baby steps of that process. Tiani, do you want to hop up and ask?
Hi, hi, David. My question is, so Tiani, and I'm starting a community for lawyers primarily. So helping lawyers to meet, connect, and support one another in various aspects of their career journey. The collateral I have right now is a blog and a podcast. And I'm just curious about how to kind of move people from this blog, podcast, and we have done events that are paid. So people have been paying to participate, but kind of move people from there into a community. And does it mean we start a Slack channel? Do we start a Facebook group? How exactly do you kind of move from just being a content provider to now actually forming and putting people together into a group? And how much time do you spend figuring out what are the things that are valuable for them? Because you don't want to just create another Slack channel that's just going to annoy people.
Yeah, we all have too many Slack channels. Yeah, so great question. One community I recommend checking out is Ironclad. They have a really great community program for lawyers, for in-house lawyers. That's their focus. So a good example for you to check out. Yeah, getting started. Don't worry too much about the platform. Platform doesn't matter as much as the people. So spend the same way you would when you're building a product. What do they tell you about building a product? Get out of the building, right? If you're just building a product without talking to people, you're almost certainly doing it wrong. Same thing for building a community. If you're building a community without talking to people, you're almost certainly doing it wrong. So I would spend the first 2 weeks to a month just getting on the phone with as many of the people who subscribe to your podcast and your newsletter and your content as possible, and just have conversations with them and ask them, what are the challenges you're dealing with? What are the problems you have? Who do you want to connect with? How do you want to connect with them? What tools are you using to connect with people right now? Where are you going to get help? And just learn as much as you can about who these people are, what their identity is, and where their need is for community. Once you have that, you're going to have, trust me, after 3 calls, you're going to have a laundry list of ideas for things that are much more interesting than let's launch another Slack channel. You know, maybe it is just like host a Zoom call with 10 people to start, but focused on, you know, a very specific problems that lawyers are facing, and they don't have a private space to talk about it right now where they can like be really honest and open. So you're having you know, a completely safe space in a virtual call for them to be able to like have real talk about this specific problem that they're dealing with. Like maybe it's about like having a client that, you know, doesn't want to work with you anymore, like something really uncomfortable, right? Like that's where like the real meat is for community, is in conversations that they have nowhere else to go to talk about, and you give them a space to do that. So just, you know, you'll have your list of tactics and things you can try, and you just have to start trying things and seeing what works and seeing what resonates. And, you know, 9 out of 10 things might not work, but if you find one format, one like special experience that really clicks with the community you're trying to build, that's a really strong foundation, and you can continue to build from there. So start by talking to people. Start experimenting with minimal ways of bringing them together, whether it's through chat or live conversations. I really like live conversations because you get to see each other, you get to build relationships, especially in the early days, and that will translate to really good engagement in a Slack community later, or circle or forums or whatever you want to use.
Thank you.
That's tremendous. Completely agree on sort of this experimentation, deeply understanding. We had Rob Fitzpatrick, the author of the Mom Test, come in a few months ago, and he just talked about sort of getting out of the building and how to have those conversations to understand what people need, more from a product perspective, but can definitely be applied to community as well. Everybody has sort of these innate or underlying needs.
100%. I think a community is like a product in a lot of ways. So I always talk about like your MVC, your minimum viable community.
Yeah, that actually parlays right into my next question, which was, how do you think about community debt? Like, do you almost think of it in a similar way as like technical debt, like where if you don't start early, you just have to like grind on it later, and it just sucks up resources at a more important time? Like, I'd love to hear if you have any parallels there.
I love this question because it's something I've been talking about more recently, and we're dealing with this right now. CMX was a bootstrapped company. We put our shit together with like duct tape and glue and spit for 5 years. And, you know, now we're acquired and we have a budget, and I'm like, what do I do with like resources and people? And we have a lot of community debt, right? Like we have a Facebook group. Our community started a Slack group that's got like 3,000 people in it now. We have like 3 different online spaces we're hosting. We have 60 chapters that are all doing different kinds of events. Like our systems aren't talking well to each other. So yeah, we have a lot of community debt. It's going to happen. Could we have been smarter about it from day one? Absolutely. Same way you could do it with product, but you also don't want to let that get in the way of you just like experimenting and trying new things, right? Like, how do you build a startup? You do things that don't scale, and then you figure out how to like, you know, make it a well-oiled machine later. It's a give and take. It's not, you know, you don't want to go completely free flowing and not think at all about your operations and processes, but you don't, especially in the early days, want to be so process driven that it's slowing you down and limiting your ability to experiment and be really nimble. So community debt is absolutely a concept, same thing as product. And I would just say like, have regular check-ins, maybe once a quarter or once a half, where you like audit your processes. So that's what we're doing now with CMX. We're doing a full audit of our entire community member journey, our experience, what happens when you get to the site, who the different personas are in our community, what their experience is like, and identifying gaps and issues in their community member journey, and identifying gaps and issues in our management systems to know where we can make things more automated or efficient.
And then Arpit, you had a question on community fatigue from the user side, and sort of thinking about what is that whole user experience across multiple communities. Do you want to jump in and ask about that?
Yeah, totally. So I think I see like if a community is like really active, a lot going on, right? I can see that being a problem too, right? Where you could almost as a user get bombarded with a lot going on. And then secondly, I feel like there's probably a threshold of how many communities as a user you can belong to. And I know a lot of people, they're already kind of at that threshold. So curious kind of how you kind of approach the both sides of this, like community fatigue from a user perspective.
Yeah. If your community's so active that people are fatigued by it, that's a good problem to have. So, you know, at that point, what you want to do is give them as intricate controls over their notifications as possible. A mistake a lot of communities make is say, like, we're going to notify you about everything, like every new post, every new event, every new comment. And that's not relevant to the user, especially in a very active community. So you want to give them notifications and let them control it so they can say, like, here's what I want to hear, here's what I don't want to hear. As far as community fatigue, yes, there's fatigue. I'm of the belief that there's always an opportunity for community because there's always some aspect of our identity that we still feel isolated around, right? So maybe there's 100 communities out there about lawyers already, but you know, there's people who want one that's focused on a specific voice or a specific set of challenges or a specific kind of lawyer. So I think of like identity as these like concentric circles, and you can get more and more and more specific, and there's an opportunity there. So like, yeah, maybe they're fatigued by all the large communities that they're a part of, but when you bring a really intimate, really curated experience, that feels like a breath of fresh air to them, and that feels new and brings new energy to them in a way that maybe they didn't even know they needed until you brought it, right? So that's why it's so important to talk to the members and really understand where is their fatigue today, and they'll tell you what their problems are. They can't tell you what their solutions are. The same way with a product, they can't tell you how to solve their problems. They can just tell you their problems. So hear their problems and then form your own hypothesis of like, okay, I think this very intentional kind of community experience would really resonate with this group of people. Let's experiment with that.
David, I'm personally curious, as I'm sure some of my teammates are as well, and maybe even the fellows. When you look at what OnDeck is building from the outside, what do you see as sort of either the parts that are working about our community or the opportunities that we're missing in terms of, at least for what it looks like to you and sort of being sort of in the sort of conversations that are happening about what we're building online, but would love to just get your take on our community.
Y'all is clearly doing something right, just based on all the positive tweets. I don't know if you're like putting something in everyone's Kool-Aid or something, but everyone seems very happy with the program and they're willing to talk about it publicly. So that's a very good sign. Not really knowing too much about the inner workings of the community. You know, I can't speak very specifically. You know, I'll join the Slack and answer more questions in there afterwards, and maybe I'll have more feedback and see more opportunities. I think the challenge for any cohort-based community program is like cohorts are almost like a cheat code for community, in that like you get people to go through an experience, especially a really challenging experience together, and they are going to connect because when you're in a challenging experience or something that's taking a lot of work or time, or you're going through it together, you have shared goals, like you start to lean on the people around you for support. That's why like military training works and hazing works and birthright works and accelerator programs work. The challenge is as soon as that cohort is done, the law of entropy will kick in and the community and connection will dissipate. And so it's almost like you need to rethink what those community programs are that you can bring to the community after the cohort, because it's going to be you're going to be solving a different problem after the cohort is done. You're going to be facing different challenges. People have different reasons for coming together, and they won't have the same kind of live shared experience that's continuing to create that connection. So you almost need to step back and say, like, from this point on, how can community solve problems for this group of people?
That's super interesting. We're actually like thinking about, okay, like what do we do with our alumni? How do we like re-engage, et cetera? And one of the big things is like, we want to move away from the word alumni, right? Because that just sort of almost gives you an excuse to not be involved anymore. So super interesting to hear about sort of the cohort, the upside of the cohort, and then sort of on the back end, you have to deal with how do you sort of continue invigorating with that long tail of value. Lais, you had a question in the Slack. Did you want to hop up?
Sure. First of all, David, very nice seeing you again. I think I saw you at the Startup Grind Global 2 years ago. So thank you for this amazing presentation. And one of the things I've been thinking about is how to use community building internally to like enhance talent retention or drive teams' performance in terms of community for organizational culture. And we're launching this On Deck community for community builders right now. So it's like the meta community at On Deck. By the way, for those of you who are like Tiani building communities, and I'm curious to see if you have any examples of companies who have done well and building communities internally. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, so every part of the spaces model can be applied internally as well. So, you know, support how our employees answering questions for each other. Product is your company, your culture is your product. So how are you collecting feedback and bringing your employees into the process of creating a better culture? Acquisition, how are employees referring new employees and helping you hire new people? Contribution, they're contributing their work and their time, but maybe content and ideas and other things as well. Engagement is employee retention. And then, you know, success is how are you helping your employees grow, learn, improve their skills, advance in their career. So from a business standpoint, you can apply all of it to it. And from a community engagement standpoint, absolutely, like it's the same exact concepts. And I mean, I believe that every company is a community. It's a group of people with a shared goal, shared identity, shared challenges and problems. And the more we can look at companies as a community, the better off you'll be and the more you'll be able to create a great culture. So like, yeah, I mean, great examples, like I love Buffer is a really good company that like is constantly just like challenging the status quo and like investing in like culture is almost their brand more than social media is. Like they're a social media product, but like culture has become their company brand. You know, they're working 4-day work weeks now. They've experimented with like leaderless organizations. They're 100% transparent. They share all their numbers and salaries and just really, really compelling stuff in terms of like experimenting with culture. But ultimately, like in all community, it's about like creating consistent spaces for people to come together, have conversations. I think companies spend a lot of time in meetings about projects and products, and they don't do enough creating experiences and spaces for people to just like connect and support each other and learn about each other, and actually form relationships, especially as more companies are moving towards virtual. You can't rely on people just like getting drinks after work or something. You have to be really intentional about creating these spaces.
Yeah, and just following up on this, I agree with you, and I feel there's a huge opportunity right now because it's not that it is an option anymore, right? Especially with remote work. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you very much for this.
Awesome. If anybody's interested in On Deck for Community Builders, feel free to follow up with Lais in Slack. The next question that I really want to explore is from, sorry, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Per or Pere? I'd love for you to come up and ask your question.
Yeah, don't worry. It's Pera. You pronounce it Pera.
Yeah? Okay, wonderful.
So, you know, I'm a data guy, and I've been, you know, a product manager, handling a lot of, you know, product data. And one of the things that I think about when I think about communities is that there's so much unstructured data, like so many problems, so many user requests, and they're phrased in very different ways. And it's sometimes hard to, you know, make sense out of it. So I'm curious to hear, you know, if you've seen any strategies, know any tools that, you know, help make sense of all of this unstructured data.
Yeah, it's a great question. Data is still a beast of a challenge in community. We're starting to see more companies starting to try to solve the community data question. Orbit is an interesting one. ComSor is an interesting one. Weaver is an interesting one. So all three are like focused on community data and creating kind of like a central repository of how people are interacting with your company and all the different spaces that you host, because it's usually not just on one platform. So that's one thing. The other thing I'll say is like, this is where you get into the tools and systems that you set up, choosing ones that are built with intention toward what's the information and data that you're trying to gather. So for example, you know, a Slack group is great for like open conversations, but it's not that good for like a support focus, because a custom, a purpose-built platform for support will have tools like letting people mark that their question was successfully answered. You'll be able to track metrics like time to answer, things like that, right? Like in a Slack group, you want more comments. In a support forum, you actually want less comments in many ways, because less comments means like they got to an answer quickly. There's platforms that are specifically built for ideation, so people can share their ideas. Like User Voice is one of them. Lithium or Koros now has features like that. Community Cloud has features like that. So people are sharing ideas, they're voting up or voting down ideas or commenting on it. So now you get that data. There's platforms built specifically for ambassadors, so you can track referrals and actions that they take and reward them in specific ways. So that's why it's important to go into it understanding your business goals, because that can impact the tools you use, and the tools you use can impact the data that you're able to collect.
Definitely, thank you very much. And I think it ties very well into the community depth that we were saying before,
100%.
thinking that in advance.
100%. Hey, we need more data people in the community world asking and answering these questions. So glad to have you here.
Definitely. I want to be sensitive of time. We're running right up on the hour, but I just wanted to say thanks, David, for coming out and delivering the talk. I think you should have the invite to Slack in your inbox, and you guys can also find him on Twitter and that email that he shared earlier. Anything else that you want to share with the group before we close out for today? And also, please take 30 seconds, fellows, to fill out today's feedback form. Very much appreciated. Helps us make all the events hopefully as good as this one.
Yes, fill out your surveys. As a fellow community builder, we love getting our surveys filled out. So always fill out your surveys. On my end, I'm at David Spinks on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. I love getting questions there. So shoot over your questions anytime. We're at CMX on Twitter as well. You can go to cmxhub.com, get all of our resources. Business of Belonging is my book that's coming out in March. If you go to my Twitter account and look at the pinned tweet, there's a link there to sign up for the pre-order list if you would like to be one of the first to grab the book, which is condensing like all of my learnings and lessons from the last 11 years into a book that hopefully helps you with a lot of these challenges. And of course, if you are going to be running any virtual events this year or any community events, would love to give you a tour of Bevy. And we're working with lots of great companies on all of their event tools, and you get to work with the CMX team if you work with Bevy. So win-win.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thanks everybody for coming out. I know we're on the hour, so I'll let everybody go, but this is great. Thanks all.
All right. Appreciate it, everyone. Thanks for coming.